Hello and welcome to the aForm Show, the premier podcast for all things architecture and design across the MENA region. Welcome to your tribe.
Hello and welcome to the show, everyone. Today's guest is Benazir Noor Mohamed, an architect and research associate at University College of London, UCL. With over a decade of professional experience and a master's degree from the Bartlett, Benazir focuses on healthy, sustainable and equitable design of the built environment. She also serves on the advisory board of the International Well Building Institute and advocates for inclusive, people-centered cities in both her research and writing. So without further ado, let's get into it. Welcome to the show, Benazir.
Hi, Alan. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So I'm gonna quickly say, you're an architect.
Yeah.
Why do you care about healthy buildings?
I wish I could tell you an inspiring story about how I was always fascinated.
I found a sick building one day.
Yeah, and my grandmother inspired me. Or like I had a passion since the beginning. But to be honest, I did not think about health at all. When I started out, I wanted to make good architecture, a building that looked absolutely beautiful. I love design. I love the craft of design. I love the poetics of space. I love everything about it. I still do. So for the first 10 years of my career, I worked across very different contexts from India to Middle East, from working with Balakrishna Doshi to moving into a more like an urban setting like Dubai, especially around the pandemic. So along that time, I was fortunate enough to be working on highly impactful project, which shaped more of me as a designer today. But one thing that I found along the time was the conversation was more about net zero or carbon pricing or energy efficiency. All of that language was more about planetary health, which is excellent, which is important, which is for future generation of humans. But there was hardly anything about human health at all. So along the way, I realized I did not want to make buildings that just looks good or met standards. I want to understand what buildings were doing to people. And that question actually led my work to health well-being and eventually into research. Then I pursued my master's in health, well-being and sustainable buildings. I was actually fortunate enough to find this one particular course. It's actually the only course in the world which exclusively looks at health well-being and the intersection of sustainability, which I really care about.
Right.
So to answer your question simply, it was not a one boom moment. Like it was a very gradual realization. And today I'm co-founding a consultancy with a very, very good friend of mine, which exclusively look at how to design and deliver healthy buildings. So that's how my journey to healthy buildings.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to ask a very obvious question, right? So as architects that practice in the region, there are a couple of basic things, obviously, sort of basic passive design, orientation, thermal massing, etc., etc. That's kind of what everyone knows.
Yeah.
What are they missing?
So to simply start with, I'll give you a quick overview. Yeah. We are an indoor species. Whether we like it or not. We spend absolutely about 90% of our time indoors, which you must have heard at multiple conference million times. So if I have to calculate Alan's age, indoor age, let's just say you're 30. Let's multiply it by 0.9, which means you have lived 27 years out of your 30 years indoor. So that's your indoor age. Isn't it alarming? Because then indoor environment has a huge influence on humans. If a building is not making you feel better, it's actually working against you. So to answer your question about energy efficiency and all of that, which is very, very important, So I don't take away from the fact that's not important, but it is also equally important. For example, if you make a building airtight for energy efficiency reason, which is the biggest retrofit strategy in the UK, they come up with making your building airtight to make it energy efficiency. But what could be the consequence of that is you could end up with stale air inside. And there is also overheating risk also, because when you tight your building so much for energy efficiency reason, in the process of solving one global issue, you might actually create another issue. So it is really important to think about health. I would also like to give another example. Like when I used to work in the office, we used to joke about like 3 p.m. sleep nap, like the 3 p.m. haze, which everyone talks about in the office. And we were all like, we always laugh about like around 3 p.m. we feel sleepy, but it's actually not the lunch doing to you. It's actually the CO2 building up on you. Like if you take a space, I'd like to be technical right now. If you take a space and And if the threshold of the space, especially for CO2, is about 1000 ppm, the research says that there must be a 30% reduction in cognitive performance.
Wow, 30%.
Yeah, 30%. And it's insane because when you look at, like, you also have your own office, right? When we look at office performance, you must be knowing the word KPI, right?
Yeah.
We look at KPI. We calculate every second, every day, every month of every employee. But we're actually looking at the wrong people business side, because if people is the biggest part of the business, a 30% cognitive gain is everything for the business. It might end up having a lot of money for you. Like, so we are actually, instead of looking at KPI, we should actually look at health performance index, not to take away from the fact that is not important, but the research has proven time and time again, and it is not given enough momentum now, I would say. I'm just talking about cognitive performance for now, but there's a lot to this. There's stress. There's so many evidences that talk about all of these things. Yeah.
Right. Interesting. So would it be fair to say that all designers listening should probably put like a carbon counter or something in their office and see if it crosses 1,000?
Yeah. I think this has been established multiple times. Maybe I'm not the first one who's talking about it. It has been established, but this has not been given enough momentum, like how we give for sustainability and climate adaptation, resilience, and all of that, because they're all very interrelated. When you look at climate adaptation measures, there's a lot of unintended consequences for the health. So in the process of saving the climate for the planet, you're also creating issue for the current generation. Like, you know, so it's...
Yeah, this concept of air tightness is something which I speak to a couple of HVAC engineers also, because again, from an efficiency point of view, even in this region, that's what you want to an extent, right?
Yeah.
Like you want, sort of no thermal gaps for, your cool air to escape, for example. But yeah, the argument I make to them is that if you don't really have a good exchange of fresh air, so to speak, and, of course, now there are a lot of fresh air handling units and things like that, which, have kind of become standard. But in many cases, you may end up in a scenario where you necessarily won't get absolutely fresh air.
Yeah.
You'll get partially recycled air.
Yeah.
And should that in any way be contaminated with bacteria or anything of that nature, a flu, for example, which is completely airborne, you risk of kind of constantly circulating that back and forth, right?
Yeah.
By the good-natured intent of keeping your building airtight, you kind of are hurting it more in that sense. But yeah, that's very interesting. So I'm almost tempted then as an architect to ask you, right? Now, we found a very interesting insight of this carbon counter, right?
Yeah.
What else can designers do for their projects?
Yeah.
Or even in their studio, for example, tangible sort of actions, if you had to give like a top 2 or a top 3, saying, of course, I know this is something that you will eventually, sort of charge for and so on and so forth. But if we could get a little free teaser for the designers listening, if they're looking at their project or their studio, what are a couple of key things which you would recommend they do and it will have a dramatic impact? Yeah,
I'll answer the question, but I also want to answer the HVAC aspect that you mentioned, like just to add on that. You mentioned how the air with bacteria and pathogens is really like harmful and all of that, but there's more to air quality. Air quality constitute about 1 in 10 death globally. I'm talking about this is established by WHO, and it is closely related to Parkinson's disease, dementia, and all of that. And still, for example, when we talk about well-being in the region, we often talk about cold plunges in the balcony, fancy infrared saunas, and all of that, right? But I bet you 100%, if you use a HEPA filter, which is a filtration for HVAC, you would have more benefits for the occupant health than all of these combines. So I'm a big believer of healthy buildings. So, and I also believe there should be a variety of solutions. It's not just one solution, not looking at just one filter or something. But when we look at this solution, it's important to prioritize the solution. Like at the time of prioritization, this cold plunges and fancy infrared sauna shouldn't be the first thing. The filtration should be the first thing. So just to touch upon the HVAC aspect that you said, there's more to HVAC. Like we might think like outdoor air is very good, but particulate matter, the term they call it, in the size of 10 might cause dementia, Parkinson's disease, and all of that. Air quality has higher risk than anything. I know I spoke a lot about air quality today. To answer your question, to come back to your question on what they all look at, there are multiple aspects. So there's air quality, there's lighting, there's acoustics, there's also ergonomics, there is inclusive, there's so many aspects. So just to touch upon one thing, I can't touch upon everything. Maybe to move away lightly from air quality into something else. If you take about lighting, for example, today we are in a lighting studio also.
Yeah, shout out to Afzal, Alex, Kareem. Thank you for letting us do this at Counterculture. Anyone listening listening in, for all your lighting requirements, reach out to Lights and Lives. But yes, awesome space. Yeah.
Yeah. So when you look at lighting, there's something called circadian rhythm. Have you heard of that?
Yes.
Yeah. So it is.
But for our audience that probably don't know, what is it?
It is a rhythm that's synced with your biological clock, which largely is responsive for your sleep cycle, your gut health, everything that we eat by food, like to improve sleep cycle, gut health. It also very much depends on your biological clock, which is synced with the circadian rhythm. That is largely dependent on the daylight, on the light, right? So,
sorry, just to get a little technical, when you say daylight, are you talking about the actual sort of lux value or, sort of visual CRI, for example? I don't know what the actual term would be. Or are you talking more about when you're quite literally, physically in daylight, sort of photons hitting your skin with vitamin D? Like what?
No, the
what
light
exactly?
levels. The light levels. For example, the biological clock is synced with your morning, like sun rises in the morning, sun sets in the evening.
Right.
Yeah. For example, in the context like UK, sometimes the sun isn't coming.
Yeah.
But it's very important for your body to have that daylighting. So how you bring that amount of daylight, sometimes we might have excessive daylight. I'm not saying daylight is the best of everything. Yeah. Daylight is essential for the body. But at the same time, it's also very important to understand how to optimize the perfect light for your building, how to optimize the perfect window to wall ratio. You might have the best light by the window, but if your work desk is like 10 meters away from that and that's dark, like it doesn't count, isn't it? So we do think about and we do, research and we do in practice also talk a lot about circadian rhythm, how light can like improve your sleep cycle, how best you can optimize your window to wall ratio, and how in context of there's no light, you can even mimic your daylight. There's a lot of strategies. You can mimic your daylight and daylight harvesting sensors around the periphery of the building. There's a lot more, like if I have to get into it. So just to touch upon your question lightly on the lighting aspect. And apart from this, there's million things like even acoustic, the sound that you hear is really correlated with your health well-being as well. So there's so many aspects that we can talk about. Yeah.
I mean, we at the podcast obviously care about acoustics.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, but you're right. And I think there are so many small tangible things, right, which us as designers, we can look at. I did like the example that you gave about HEPA filters sort of being, ignored over cold plunges, which is so true. It is so true. And I think if you kind of zoom out from a designer point of view, it's kind of like saying, oh, this house I'm building is sustainable, but it's actually oriented the wrong way. And to make it sustainable, I'm now putting solar panels on it.
Yeah.
So it's like, solar panels would work, but had you just done this first basic thing, it would have had so much more of a drastic difference. And that's what I imagine HEPA filters are, which is very cool. Okay, so moving on then, for our audience, again, who are pretty much architects and interior designers, if you could speak to the up and coming designer, right? Someone who's, fresh out of university, for example, let's say just left the Bartlett, right?
Yeah.
Has now joined a firm and is looking to do meaningful, impactful work, not just in design, but across, I'm going to call them happy buildings.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. I like this word actually.
Happy buildings. Yeah. What should they be looking at in terms of technology, in terms of resource that's out there available? Maybe there's something which is new and cutting edge, which maybe even, most designers don't know of. Is there anything like that you'd want to share with them?
See, the resources and technology, they keep changing every year.
Yeah.
So
that's why I'm asking.
Yeah. They keep changing every year. So I'd like to give like small insight, probably something they might not know, like 3 challenges they will absolutely face. Like if you're like...
Challenge accepted. I'm ready.
So that's something I didn't know at all. So the 3 challenges, there are a million challenges, by the way, to be incorporating healthy buildings, strategies and all of that. But before I tend to give the advice for the young architects, I'd also like to give like a brief overview of like what are the challenges that we face and stuff, because it's very important. I want to like really address this because I didn't know this. Yeah. So one of the biggest challenge and the most absurd one would be return of investment. So you might come out and say like, please improve the air quality to the client. Like you might propose strategies like, as a consultancy or like an independent designer or something like that. When you care about health and well-being so much, the first question that you would get asked is, what is the return of investment for improving my daylight? My question is, do you ask return of investment for installing a first aid kit in a building or like a defibrillator in an office or like clean water?
Or the insurance policy on your car.
Yes. But why on earth are we still asking return of investment for improving air quality? Because air quality is closely related to health and safety. It should be fundamental. It should not be primary or secondary. As much as we run away from this, we talk about all technical things. We read a lot about research. research. Once you know about this, once you see this, you can't unsee it. I feel that's a problem of this. So you get really passionate about it, you get really curious and really like dedicated to it, but you'll be knocked down 1,000,000 times by asking this return of investment question. Hang in there. So that's one thing. And the second thing is, health and well-being is at the moment, it's like for example, if I want to improve my health and well-being, I go to a consultancy. There's no consultancy. There's only sustainable consultancy, isn't it? So
True. Yeah. There are green building specialists, but not really. I mean, I suppose there are some, but yeah, definitely not like, I mean, it's definitely not mainstream.
Yes. So it's more like a subset of sustainable consultancy at the moment. So it gets lumped into the same basket as energy efficiency, and it does not gain the enough momentum. Like it's more like an afterthought. After your whole building is done, after your post-evaluation is done, give that certification for the marketing reasons and you'll have higher rental yields and all of that. But in reality, how much ever the sustainability is important, don't get me wrong, sustainability is absolutely important. Planetary health is absolutely important. But if you don't think about human health that time, it's not going to work. It's not going to work in long time. Like in the problem of solving one, we might create another. This is one of the challenge. So, and another thing that I would say is to answer your question on how young architects should be, as cliche as it sounds, I think it should be curious. Be open to data. We never get taught in architecture school. Be open to data. Be open to collaboration between different disciplines. Be actually open to closely analyzing people who will actually live and work in the place that you live. That is more important. And the second thing is, don't be afraid to deal with policy and wider system in the built environment. Again, that's something never taught in architecture school, because policy, research and practice are closely interconnected. And when you talk about research and impact-driven design, it's more about asking the right question than following the good design and stuff. So, and policy is very important, because only through policy you can achieve impact at scale. Otherwise, you can only design for one single box. Yeah.
Let me then ask again for maybe myself, because I'm a bit ignorant, obviously. When you say policy, you're referring to sort of building guidelines, or you're talking more at a macro scale of built up areas and buildings? Like what exactly are you referring to when you say policy?
Okay, policy. So maybe I could give you an example of the research that I'm doing at UCL, and I could say how policy is very important. So I'm doing this research, I'm supporting the research, that's the right word, called ARCADE, which is Accelerating Resilience and Climate Adaptation for Domestic Environments of Vulnerable Population. Basically, overheating risk of elderly people. Like what are the overheating risk of elderly people? So as a built environment specialist, as an architect, as a researcher, I might end up researching everything and give you like bullet points on like, you could do this, you could do that to solve from overheating risk. But unless all of this is feeding into policy, you can never achieve impact at scale. You can cater to 3 people or 4 people or maximum 5 people. But if you want to achieve impact at scale, if it has to be understood on more like a wider system level, on more like it reaches the people, because our work is about doing it for the people, isn't it? Without policy, you cannot achieve impact at scale. You have to work closely with local councils, with government councils, with policy people. You have to understand how your research and design could actually be translated into policy. Sometimes research and design is more like a report and then it sits in the corner and it never gets translated into the policy, because we don't understand, as architects, we don't understand the relationship between design and policy. I'm talking more in the city level, more in vulnerable situation, more in like, not in terms of building codes or something, even in small context. For that example, let's say you're an interior designer and then you're looking at something that's really absurd in the interior design field and you're really frustrated and you've been talking on and off to your colleagues, maybe in the podcast or something like that. But it's never going to achieve impact at scale if you don't reach to the government councils, if you don't look at policy level, if you don't analyze the existing policy and all of that. So policy is key. Yeah, that's exactly what I meant.
I sort of see what you mean now in terms of obviously a much larger impact. Makes sense. Okay, so a very next sort of, again, think of this as a very selfish conversation for myself, trying to just learn more about the topic. If there are designers out there who are interested to learn more about this topic, because obviously, you know, energy efficiency, simulations, etc., I think designers are kind of onto that and they kind of know where to go, what to do, etc.
Absolutely.
But this seems like still a fairly new topic, right? Well, not new. I mean, it's probably existed for a long time, but we're now talking about it only now. So if they wanted to, again, learn more, anything that you can point at in terms of a book or a research paper which they would really find interesting, anything of that nature?
So when I said it was a gradual realization, health and well-being, one of my biggest step forward was International Well-Building Institute. So they do this well accreditation, which is called Well AP. You can become a well accredited professional. I would say just getting onto that. So they explain it across 10 concepts: water, mind, body, community, and everything in the context of built environment. Everything to talk about particulate matters and air filters and everything that I spoke about today, circadian rhythm, everything is covered in that. So if you're fairly new to this topic and if you really want to learn about this, I would say just get on to the International Well-Building Institute. They have done a lot of research. They are more than a decade over here. They're an organization who really does impactful work. They have done so much research on how investing in health pays back as well, because that's something that I spoke about today.
Yeah.
Like they have strategies for built environment. They also give this well accredited professional. They give so many platforms. They give so many resources. If you're new at it, I would say like just get onto that website and read about it. And there's also one thing that inspired me when I first started getting interested in this topic was Healthy Buildings by Joseph Allen. Joseph Allen is the director of Harvard Healthy Buildings program. So he talks and fights a lot about indoor air quality. So he has written a book called Healthy Buildings and you must read it. He has talked about every amazing thing there. It's about like how, the election chamber, it's always in circular shape, isn't it? Like there was a great fire that came and after that they remodeled into like the traditional, like the auditorium style kind of a seating over there. But then they realized that the way the chambers are designed are basically because they're all facing the back of each other. Like when you're speaking, when you're making a point, you're not actually making a point behind the back. And if you're like sitting in a different version, you're like yelling at each other. So he really talks about like very nice insights, things like that. How like all of this, I really love that book. I think it could be a very good starting point.
Yeah, I mean, the closest one I'm thinking is like the Oval Office in the States, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's quite literally the Oval Office. Yeah, that's actually true. Wow.
Yeah.
I never thought of it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it makes sense. Makes sense.
Yeah.
I think there's something which, this is again me thinking out loud, right? I mean, I'm thinking about the point you made about ROI being a point of friction, right?
Yeah.
Now, if I were to just put like the client's hat on, right? Just to play devil's advocate, so to speak, I can see how they would see something like a HEPA filter or additional works to what is already budgeted for. I can see how they would see it as an additional cost, right? Because in reality, it is. And it is not, I'm assuming it's not a small increase. It would be a fairly significant increase. So I can see why they asked the question. Do you think there is worth in someone doing a paper, for example, which actually tackles something like this? For example, what I mean to say is, if say there's an architect that wants to design a G+30 office building, right?
Okay.
And they want to use the principles that you spoke of. They do the design, they take it to the client, and the client says, what's the ROI for this additional happy building cost, right? What is the happy building tax that I have to pay?
Yeah.
If that designer can then maybe take some kind of a paper that says, hey, listen, your original cost would have been X. Now you're going to pay X plus whatever percentage, right? When you do this X plus whatever percentage, it also will historically allow you to charge 30% higher rate. It'll allow you to sell at 50% higher square foot rate. And why you can charge those rates is because you can prove with facts that people who work in these offices have a 30% more efficiency because we have carbon counters, for example, right? Something which is obviously not as dense as a research paper, but something which is literally, 10 slides, for example, just to help them fight that sort of ROI battle that you were talking about. Do you think there is worth in someone investigating that and putting some kind of a document like that together?
There is actually millions of research that's done around that area.
No, but that's what I'm saying, right? Like a research paper is one thing, which is fine. Something which is more digestible for the average client that probably is not going to read a research paper. Someone who literally think someone who has like 5 seconds to make a decision, right? Something digestible that they can see and be like, okay, fine, that makes sense.
Yeah. Again, I would go back to that International Well-Building Institute example. They have this particular research called Investing in Health Pays Back. It is not a paper. It is just a presentation with graphs. People love graphs, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Shows how a normal building without well consideration or a building with well consideration has higher rental yields, has higher tenant retention than the normal. And so I'm going to talk about technical aspect here.
Sure.
So let's take the same HEPA filter example. I like how the HEPA filter has received the momentum in this conversation.
Yeah, because in my mind, it's such a simple thing to fix. It's not like you have to tear out all your ACs and you have to put a whole new thing. It's a very simple thing to change.
Yeah. Okay, let's just start on a technical aspect. So there's a huge upfront cost, yeah. But it also can reduce your operational cost in one way. It also can reduce your life cycle cost. When I say life cycle cost, in a 20-year span, what would you use? Like rather than having your normal HVAC to having this filtration, and not only your life cycle cost, it will give you higher rental yield when they know, because people care about wellness these days. Like in the region, at least in our region,
Definitely.
wellness has huge momentum. Even well certification, they have done billions of square feet certification across the UAE. So people have so much care for health and wellness here, but sometimes it's translated into all of these cool amenities. Health and wellness, when you think of, always it very much talks about the amenities that you have in the building, right? The amenities, they're good. They're really good. They increase our wellness and all of that, but that's secondary. The primary aspect is all of this, right? So if you are a person who really wants to show them, I would say like go to International Well Building Institute. They have the simple presentation which shows that how rental yields are more for the building, which consider health and wellness, and how tenant retention is more. Like for example, if you take Aldar properties now, they're completely health and wellness. They are well certified. They are Fitwell certified. They are priced premium, and people are still buying. They're almost sold out even before they are launching all the time. So you must know that if you are an investor, if you're a developer, don't get me wrong that return of investment is absurd. It's actually important, because as a designer, as a health and well-being passionate advocate, I'm advocating for things which I'm working on, right? So a developer who's working for money, or like a client who wants to care about it, it's no harm in asking about the return of investment. But it's just that to understand sometimes it gets translated into money, direct operational cost I'll see. Like for example, if I install a DOS heat recovery system with radiant cooling, I'll have like 10 to 20% reduction in cooling demand, which is higher than the normal HVAC probably. But in the life cycle cost in 20 years, it might prove to be highly efficiency for me. So we can have like direct operational costs for certain strategies. For example, strategies like biophilia, like your connection to nature. Like I'm saying, like, it's very important. Biophilia is often mistaken as plants, which it's not only plants, right? It's about like being with the nature, even the materials that you choose, the textures that you choose, closely resembling to nature. All of that probably I can't say like, okay, monthly you will say 50 dirhams or like 50,000 dirhams, like all of that. Yeah. But sometimes it's to understand the debate between, sometimes it's cost, sometimes it's health and well-being, which in long term will also be translated into cost, because your health also costs you, isn't it? So I would say that if you're fighting for it, just go ahead and show the presentation, but also like really speak to at the end of the day, everybody is humans, right? And everybody cares about health and wellness more than anything that they do. At the heart of it, everybody really wants to stay alive and stay healthy and happy. So if you talk about the investment part a little bit, but also like really go and debate to them deeply, like, about why this is important for the people, I think slowly they'll realize.
Nice. I kind of have a very simple question that whenever I'm faced with these kind of things, I simply say, would you live here?
Yeah.
It's as simple as that.
Yeah.
And if the answer is no, let's fix it.
Yeah.
It's as fundamental as that is.
Yes, exactly.
Would you live
I love
here?
it.
Yeah. Benazir, obviously you are very passionate about this topic and I love it, right? We can talk forever, but we are sort of reaching the end of the episode. So at this point, I typically like to look forward. I know we talked off air about what is to come in the future, and I'll leave it up to you if you want to share it or not. But essentially the question would be, what is on the horizon for you looking forward into the next year, the next 5 years, for example? What are you looking to achieve? What kind of impact do you want to make via research, via your studio, via as an architect, whatever it is? What are you sort of working towards?
Yeah, excellent question. I love it. I think the only thing that really drives me is health and well-being should be considered from the early design phase. Very technically speaking, shouldn't be like an afterthought. Shouldn't be the whole building is done, now make it health and well-being for me. No, it should be from the early design phase. Like designers should start thinking about it, like really advocating, really making people aware of all of the problems associated with the built environment. Like I said, like we spend a lot of time indoors. Like if we don't realize it now, it will be high time into the future. So really, I hope there will be a point where people consider health and well-being as a primary powerful tool of design, and they start designing, because at the core of it, I'm an architect. At the core of it, I love design. I love everything to do with design. So my biggest aim or biggest direction is inspiring people to consider it from the early design phase and not look at it as like a very fancy objective or like only purely at the cost aspect, but it's more like at the end of the day, the people who are designing and managing your building nothing has more power than your doctor for your health, in my point of view. And definitely it has been proven multiple times. It's not only me talking, it's proven in research. Yeah. So people understand the seriousness of it and like really understanding it from the early design phase, including architects. Not only I'm talking about clients or developers or like people architects also. That's something. And what's on the horizon? Like I gave like a bit of clue teaser. I'm co-founding a consultancy with a very good friend of mine, which exclusively looks at designing and delivering healthy buildings. So I'm really excited for that. I'm really excited for how the course of design takes from a health and well-being aspect and really giving this enough momentum, especially in this region. I think this region is really open to everything. Like, any good things, any good concept. That's something I really, when I was in the UK, I was a big advocate for UAE. I think we fairly spoke about this.
That's a whole other different conversation. But yes.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Dubai because when you have an idea and when there's value to it, this region really accepts you. Yeah, like having probably like health and well-being council, which really takes this forward would be ideal. And I'm really looking forward. Yeah.
Very cool. I mean, to be honest, as much as because I'm also thinking from the point of view of the audience listening, right? Like if there's an architect working in the studio now who has just gotten, let's say a G+4 building, right? Something fairly smallish, standard, that kind of thing. And he's thinking, I want to make it like a well-certified building. I want to use these principles. And he's now thinking to himself, oh, but wait, I have a very tight deadline and I have to design it. I have to make it within the principles, within these well principles. I then need to think about overall sustainability in terms of HVAC systems, energy efficiencies. I then need to think about my LEED certified materials. I then need to think about, and there's so many layers, I suppose, that gets added on, wherein as a designer, maybe subconsciously, there's just some kind of elimination done, wherein you're like, okay, fine, I can only do this, and this, but I can't really think about acoustics because my deadline is tomorrow.
Yeah.
So there's some kind of sacrifice that happens there. Again, as a solution, what I think is, at least from what I understand now, from what you're saying, when there are resources at the Well Institute, for example, I think this exercise has to happen once.
Yeah.
Because I would imagine that most buildings are more or less the same, right?
Yeah.
Of course, there will be the outliers which require, something entirely custom and bespoke, which will work only for that project and so on. But for the most part, I think once you know what you need to do, it will almost be like a plug and play that you add on to your design. I suspect.
Yeah. To say this, like I know I spoke about big interventions like HEPA filters and like air quality filters, but I also strongly believe it's a variety of solution. Yeah. From small solution, even like having the flow mat or like, for example, the right signage. For example, sometimes in a building, we don't even know where the staircase is. Like, going on a staircase improves your health. Like, like even in the way you design your signage, for example, that quickly prompts. For example, we think always the staircase should have the priority more than the left. But in many of the buildings, the first thing that you see is left and you automatically take the left and go, even though you have the capacity to take the staircase. Someone doesn't have the capacity or the ability to take the staircase. But I would say like even like really giving a thought process of something small as a signage and like really something that's very effective, like, very well designed and like looking at like, oh, this is a staircase. And in the way the staircase is designed in a more fun way where people actually use the staircase and things like, would I actually like living in this place? Would this actually make me feel irritated? Like, thinking about like the small window to wall ratio, which we often discuss about in energy efficiency aspects, but also to think about, will this have enough light to me? Will this give me a lot of like light irritation or will it give me like a good things, like even small things like revolving doors, like, so that the dust that carries from the outside, there's a lot of dust, like gets accumulated in the simple vestibule. And then you go like, it's not always the highly expensive strategy. It's also like, even in the strategy, when someone comes to me, I even propose as simple as like a floor mat, you know what I mean? To make sure the dust from outside will not go from inside, not a fancy floor mat again, like a floor mat that actually works for you in terms of air quality and things like that. So it's about being mindful of health and well-being, as mindful you are about energy efficiency as well, and really talking about the intersection of both while designing. Yeah.
I mean, I already have like so many things that I want to change come Monday morning. There's going to be changes.
Okay, amazing. So it's nice that I've inspired at least one person. One is a good number to start with.
Awesome. I'm hoping it's more than one. Someone out there, prove me wrong. Say that, I'm going to change something too. Benazir, again, like I said, we can talk forever, right?
Yeah.
But I'm conscious of time and your time especially. And I think we've already shared quite a lot of insights. And we definitely have you on for a part 2, where you can probably update us and say, hey guys, now there's, this is the next level of things that you can look at. But a fun way to end the episode is something that we have called the aForm tradition.
Okay.
Which basically is a question that's been asked by one of our previous guests.
Okay.
To the next guest, not knowing who they are.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't know who asked the question. The person who asked the question doesn't know who's going to receive the question.
Okay.
It's just a bit of fun to sort of conclude the episode.
Okay.
Off late, they've been quite silly. There seems to be a trend of that. Sometimes they're quite philosophical, sometimes they're design related, but it's a general sort of question. And it's pulled entirely randomly. So you can't look at who the previous guest was and think, oh, it must be their question. It could be from like 2 years ago.
Oh my goodness, I'm excited. Shoot.
So I'm just going to pull up your question today, which is, hold on, where is it? Okay. Yeah, I misread it. The question that we have for you today is, what is a small, everyday habit, reminder or practice that keeps your creativity alive amid the pressures and realities of delivering projects? So what is a small, everyday habit, reminder or practice that keeps your creativity alive amid the pressures and realities of delivering projects?
That's an interesting question.
I'm going to bet this has something to do with well.
No.
I check my HEPA filters before I start working.
I wish I could say that. Like I said, I wish I could tell you an inspiring story of how I started, how I'm going. I don't have an inspiring story. I didn't think about health at all. I would like to say I sketch and I use my time on all of that. I love people who sketch, and I'm not very, very amazing at sketching, although I very abstract sketching and all of that. I tend to write a lot, and in my free time, nothing to do with architecture. Sometimes some thoughts really come. I'll really pause all the work that I'm doing. I take my notes, my favorite part in my phone, and then I start writing about anything that could be silly. When I'm talking all of this important things like Parkinson's disease, nothing to do with that. It could be as silly as something. So
it's like, I think Tom was right. Jerry was kind of really annoying in that day.
Yeah, something like that. So that really makes me pull back, really puts the perspective of I'm doing something big and thing. I like to be silly. Yeah. And also I'm not sure if I should say this in air, and also bit of irritating my husband and coming back. That gives me good pause and good creativity.
I think there's a lot of people who will agree with that. A lot of women listening will agree to that. Yes. I don't know why it is so awesome for you guys, but a lot of people have told me the same thing.
Yeah. I mean, on the positive aspect, he also really say sensible things. When I'm really pressurized or something, I just give him a call. Sometimes he puts me into perspective. Sometimes I call him exclusively for irritating. So it really works. I'm telling you. That's why I said I wish I could tell an inspiring thing, but honestly, I don't have amazing sketching qualities or something, but it's as simple as writing something or speaking to my husband.
I have a solution for your sketching. We'll talk off it, but I have a solution for you.
I know you sketch really well, by the way.
I do not, kind of, maybe, but no. But I have a solution for you regardless. Anyway, Benazir, thank you so much for coming on. This has been awesome. We'll have your details for anyone who wants to reach out. Check the show notes below in the episode. You should find it. We're excited about your next project. We wish you all the best, obviously. We definitely want to have you back on the show and sort of update us on what is happening out there in all things well. Hopefully, someone listening in also thinks about policy and happy buildings.
Yes.
And maybe we see some change in that as well. So thank you so much for coming on. The show is only possible because of people like yourself giving us your time. So thank you so much on behalf of all of us.
And thank you so much, Alan. Today, I'm going with a very big takeaway. I keep calling it healthy building. I think I should call it happy buildings from now. Yeah. And I absolutely enjoyed. It was more like talking to a friend. The podcast was very organic and I really enjoyed it. I really, really enjoyed it. Awesome. To be as simple as that. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Very nice. And for the rest of you guys, we will catch you guys next week.
Fellow aFormer, thank you so much for your time. If this episode added any value to you, please share it with anyone who may benefit. If you want to carry on the discussion, please get in touch with us over socials. We are at aForm Show on the gram and hello@aform.studio on email. That is at aForm Show on the gram and hello@aform.studio on email. Until next time, stay inspired.